Today we're going to talk about the techniques for making yeast breads. As you can see, there are many different kinds of yeast breads, and they've often been called the staff of life. But today we're going to work on making our own loaf of white bread, rolls, and Carmel Rolls, my personal favorite. But before we get started doing that, let's talk about some of the common ingredients that you use in yeast breads. Here are the most common ingredients used in making yeast breads. Our first ingredient is yeast. It leavens the bread or simply makes the dough rise and become light. There are actually two different kinds, quick and regular. They need to be dissolved in warm water. And the water can't be too hot because yeast is actually a living plant. If the water's too hot, it'll kill it. The next ingredient is flour. Flour is an important ingredient in bread baking because it contains gluten, which is actually protein. There are many different types of flours to work with. For example, all-purpose flour, buckwheat flour, rye flour, soy flour, and whole wheat flour. Butter, margarine, short meat, and corn oil are all examples of fat. Yeast breads need fat because they make the bread soft and tender. Sugar works with the yeast to make the dough rise. There are many different types of sugar: white sugar, honey, brown sugar, and even molasses. Liquids are an important part of bread making because they actually activate the yeast. Milk and water are the most common liquids used, but they produce very different results. Water makes the bread become crusty, while milk produces a much softer bread. Eggs add nutritional value, color, and also flavor. They are often used in sweet dough such as Carmel Rolls or dinner rolls. Salt is another important ingredient. It brings out the flavor in the bread and it slows the yeast from working too quickly. Okay, now that we know all about the ingredients we need to make yeast bread, let's get started by washing our hands. It's really important to remember to use warm water and plenty of soap. It's also important to remember to wash your hands for at least 20 seconds. This is important for food safety in the kitchen. If you need to know how long 20 seconds is, there's a couple of really great songs you can sing, either the ABC song or the Happy Birthday song. We're going to mix part of the flour, the yeast, the sugar, and the salt. We're going to stir those together and then add our liquids. We'll start by adding the oil and then our water and milk, which has been heated to 125 degrees. Then we're going to mix this with a hand mixer for 3 minutes on medium speed. This is a cool rise recipe. Now we're going to add the remainder of our flour, and we're going to do the rest of this by hand. Just going to use a spoon to mix the flour in. I'm going to stir this until all the flour is mixed together. It's important to do this because we want a firm dough, not a batter, like a cookie or a cake. At this point, I can start mixing it with my hands, just to get the dough to pull together. Once I have a dough that's holding together, a nice firm dough, I sprinkle my working surface with a little bit of flour. I do this so that the dough doesn't stick to the surface. And now I'm doing what we call kneading the dough. I turn it over and I press it with the heels of my hands. You can turn it over quite a few times and press. What I'm doing by kneading is actually creating the structure of the dough. We do this for 5 to 8 minutes. Just keep pulling it over and pressing in with the heels of your hands. Now we've been kneading our dough for 5 to 8 minutes now, and you can see how smooth it's gotten. You can tell when your dough is ready for the proofing process when an indentation in the center stays. Now we can take this dough and wrap it in saran wrap and place it in the refrigerator overnight to be baked tomorrow, or we can place it in a lightly greased bowl covered lightly with saran wrap and place it in a warm spot for 35 to 40 minutes to proof. So now you can see that our dough has risen by nearly twice its size. It's smooth and elastic, and the gluten has had a chance to develop. So now this is my favorite part. I get to punch the dough down to break some of those bubbles in it. Now I'm going to take this out of the bowl and I'm going to shape my dough. And what you want to do is take a rolling pin and a lightly floured work surface. And I'm going to roll my dough out to approximately a 12 by 8 inch rectangle. And I have a ruler to kind of help me show me how big I need to be. This will give us a nice piece to start with to roll our dough into a nice loaf shape. We're going to start at the short end here, and we're going to roll and pinch. Pinching is important because we're helping to hold the shape of the loaf. We're just going to keep rolling it. We're going to make sure we pinch the edges to seal them. We're going to turn down slightly the outer edges. Now we have a nice loaf shape. Now we're going to place our loaf in an oiled bread pan. As you can see, there's many different kinds of bread pans. Glass bread pans tend to hold the heat more. Today we're going to use a Teflon pan. I'm going to spray it lightly with the oil and place my loaf inside, and now we're ready to bake. Now I'm going to cover it lightly with saran wrap and place it in a warm spot and allow it to rise to twice its size before it's baked. Okay, now that our dough has risen to twice its size, we're going to bake it. We're going to bake it in an oven that's been preheated to 400 degrees. I'm going to bake it on the lower third of the oven for about 35 to 40 minutes. Now let's see if our bread is finished baking. It's been 35 minutes. It looks like a beautiful golden brown. We'll pull it out of the oven and set it on a wire rack to cool. And at this point, if you like a softer crust, you can brush the dough with butter. Now let's move on to my personal favorite, Carmel Rolls. So as you can see, my dough is ready to be punched down here and ready to be rolled out. I'm working on a lightly floured surface because the dough can stick. I'm going to flour a little bit on the top also. Now what I want to do here to make cinnamon rolls or caramel rolls is roll the dough out to a 12 by 8 rectangle. I've got my ruler here again so I can see if I'm at the right size. Once I have my dough to the right size, I'm going to brush it with butter. Just needs a light brushing of butter. And then I'm going to sprinkle it with cinnamon and sugar. Some people like lots of cinnamon sugar. Some people like less, but I prefer a lot. Now that I'm done sprinkling it with the cinnamon and sugar, I'm going to roll it from the long end into a roll. I kind of pinch under as I roll. I'm going to tuck under my ends also. Now my dough is ready to be cut. I need to cut it into 9 pieces to fit into my pan. So I'm going to make marks on the top with a knife. Now at this point, I can either cut the dough completely through with my knife, or I can use thread. I have a piece of thread right here. I go under the dough and bring the 2 pieces together to make a clean slice. You can see how beautifully that worked. Let's prepare our pan. Now if I was making cinnamon rolls, I'd spray the pan first with non-stick cooking spray. But for caramel rolls, I'm going to spread caramel in the bottom of the pan. This is a homemade caramel sauce that I've made up ahead of time out of brown sugar, butter, and Caro syrup. Just going to spread the caramel all across the bottom of the pan. Then I can just place my rolls in the pan. Could also add nuts if you like nuts to the caramel. Now what I found is the easiest for removing the rolls from the pan once they're baked is just to invert the pan onto a platter immediately after it comes out of the oven. Now we're going to cover our rolls lightly with saran wrap and put it in a warm spot to let it proof. I'm preparing a pan for our final yeast bread recipe. We're going to be making dinner rolls and cloverleaf rolls. As you can see, my bread is ready to go. It's all punched down and ready to be shaped. Again, I'm going to work on a lightly floured surface so the dough doesn't stick. I'm going to cut my dough in half. To make dinner rolls, I'm going to cut golf ball sized pieces from one half of my dough. And I'm going to form them with my hand. Just roll them and shape them into a ball shape. It's as simple as that. Then they're ready to be placed in the pan. If you can't get the shape the way you want it, you can always pinch under and turn under the edges to give you a beautiful looking top. It's just placed in the pan and ready to proof. To make cloverleaf rolls, I'm going to cut 3 quarter-size pieces from my dough. And then I'm going to shape the dough into 3 round balls. And again, I can pinch under the edges to give me a beautiful looking round shape. And I'm going to place 3 of them into the pan to proof. This will give me a really fun look. There are many different kinds of shapes that you can make for dinner rolls, and these are just a couple of the ones that we're going to show you today. If time is an issue and you want a homemade taste in less time, there are many wonderful refrigerated and frozen bread doughs you can purchase. Or you can purchase a ready-to-mix bread dough in a box that can be baked in your oven or a bread machine. There are many different ways to enjoy our bread. It's the perfect companion to foods like cheese and peanut butter, or we can add nuts or dried fruits to give it texture and nutrition, or to make it special for a holiday. Today we have made a basic yeast bread recipe and made it into many wonderful things. We've showed you how to make dinner rolls and a loaf of bread, and even Carmel Rolls, my personal favorite. I hope I've inspired you to bake.